What are we talking about today?
We're gonna tackle the beginning of the year hot topic, body image.
Let's do it.
I know that this is very much a part of a lot of your conversations and what you do with women.
It is. It's
As a
always hard
person.
to know where to start with this one. And I
sure.
think like when we were planning out talking about this, it's really important to just acknowledge that with body image, obviously our brains go immediately to weight loss usually as women. And it's not the biggest piece, which I think is going to be most of our topic today, is just trying to get at it from more of a self-worth place versus completely obsessing about, well, if I just lose 5 more pounds, oh wait, I lost 5 more pounds. Okay, so I'll lose 5 more pounds and then I'll feel bad about myself. It's not about that. It's about what's going on inside and about the dialogue. And I just wrote a podcast, I just wrote an Instagram post about it. And it's just always so interesting to me. Like it feels like my life is very cyclical because like every year I talk about the same topics, and every time it comes up, I'm just like, oh, are we doing this again? Like we're still needing these reminders. Yep. And it's always important, I think, to come back to being reminded that it is cyclical. Like we're all going through years of our lives, and it's going to be changing monthly. It's going to be changing weekly. It changes daily. And I think as women, we have to continuously find that positive mindset for ourselves to come back to that comes from that place of self-worth, that we can be like, okay, I'm having a fat day. Let's just call it a fat day because that's what everybody calls it. And it's not a fat day, but when you're getting into that mindset of, I don't feel good about myself, whatever the reason is that you're feeling that way, what can you do to kind of bring yourself back to feeling good about yourself? And
right.
And I think like when we're talking about this, I think, the easiest way for me to kind of start getting into the heat of it is to kind of go back to where I came from with body image and kind of where I'm at now. And I think it might be an important journey for a lot of people to go on, is to go back to your teenager self and just kind of reflect on what was going on for you then, and then come to yourself right now. And just, I think for twofold, right? Because I think I'm going to ask you kind of in a second, just like what you were thinking about as a teenager, but I have one more point. Just, I think, say you're a woman in your 30s now, maybe you're a woman in your 60s. Where's your headspace now, body image wise, versus being a teenager? Like, were you in a negative place there? Were you feeling really good about yourself? Do you feel better or worse about yourself now? Do you feel the same about yourself is probably the most interesting point. And I think that's what I would love to have people get out of this podcast the most, is just that if you never ask yourself that question of, wait a minute, is this something I'm carrying with me year after year after year of my life, and I'm never evolving out of this perspective of I don't like myself because of my body, that requires some self-talk. And that requires a little bit of you going inside and figuring out what is it that I can't get over with this, that I'm carrying forward, And I only say that because I've been on this journey myself, and I continuously go on this journey. And I think it might be interesting for people to hear from our perspective. So I'll draw that into it. I just wanted to kind of go over that point so people could have that thought as we're going along. But I think it will be interesting, and I know it will be because we talked this podcast out, for people to hear where we're at, because I do think that Jenna and I have very different viewpoints, but we have the same theme kind of throughout. And all I'm hoping for this, guys, is that you get out of this and you just have a little bit of a reflection moment. And like, we're not trying to solve anything here. We're all gonna end up doing the same thing week after week and month after month, but I think it's just, hopefully after us all having this dialogue, it's something you can come back to and maybe you'll get something out of it. So
yeah, absolutely. And like, let me respond to like a couple of the first things that you said is that I think also it's really important to note, like the way that we're talking about this here is that there's a separate delineation between body image and something like weight loss. And we don't necessarily want to correlate the two, even though there are relationships with it, because it is, whether we like it or not, the idea of weight loss in North America is very much attributed to body image. And what we're trying to say is, let's try to deal with these in a separate way in order to see maybe how they relate with each other, and also talk about sort of like your journey with your own body, right? So I think we talked about when we were talking about this podcast, and since we've known each other for 20 years, we know each other's 16-year-old selves, right? So, you knew me at 16, I knew you at 16. And I think that, in an interesting way, even though we had moments of being very close, I actually think that we had a bit of differences, in terms of how we coped with our stresses as a teenager and the things that we absorbed as teenagers, like going through our high school years. And I think that we'll probably get to more of my personal sort of like journey and the way that I grew up. But when you met me at 16, for the most part, I lived outside of North America. So, I spent the first 9 years of my life in the Middle East and the majority of like my years in the Caribbean here in the Cayman Islands. And so, body image really is, it can be culturally different across the world. And so when you met me at 16, it was kind of interesting to walk into a high school where, that North American, body type ideal was very much at the forefront of everything that was being thrown to us through like media and all of those type of things that I necessarily did not have access to when I was growing up.
Which is something that it's like, it's been interesting because I've known you so long, but we've actually never really talked about this. Like in terms,
yeah, that's true.
Which is kind of bizarre because I know how I felt. Like, so just to give you guys a little bit of reference, Jenna and I both started at the same high school in grade 10, but she was coming from the Middle East. And were you coming from Grand Cayman then?
Well, actually, I was coming. It's very complicated. I was coming. Okay, so I was actually moved to Vancouver from Florida. So my first real like moment of like body, like dealing with girls and body image in high school was moving from the Caribbean and the Cayman Islands to Florida at a very stereotypical school where the cheerleaders and the jocks ruled the roost. Like if you could put into, all those stereotypical teenage movies from the United States that came out in the 90s, that is where I spent my first year in North America. And then that's when you met me. I moved there at 15, and that only lasted a year. And then you met me at 16 in, I guess, Elgin Park Secondary. Shout out to that crew. But so we've actually never really, it's funny, like, because we just, as teenagers, you and I gravitated towards each other, and kind of accepted each other. We didn't really spend time talking about this kind of stuff, like our,
well, you don't also at 16. And I think that's why I had, that when we had this thought of like, it would be fun to kind of go back. Cause like I don't know if everybody does go back. I mean, I don't go back that often, but I think it's an interesting exercise to be like, wait a minute, like, how did I end up here? Like in many areas of your life, and being like, oh, okay. Like there's been 20 years, like what happened in that 20 years? Like, and And so, and I mean, you don't often think about, okay, like what was my 16-year-old self's body image? But I think in terms of this discussion, it's interesting as a reference point. So anyways,
absolutely. Yeah. So sorry if I took too long kind of like describing, but I think it does really, me growing up outside of North America plays a big role in this. I feel like,
I think it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So like when you met me at 16, I mean, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the early 2000s, year 2000, when the 1-inch jeans, low rise jeans were in, and the crop tops were that was what everybody was supposed to wear, right? And everybody had to look like Christina Aguilera or like Britney Spears. That was the body image of, you know, and what was sort of like marketed to young girls at that time. And I mean, I feel like that was the time where I started thinking, you know, to myself, and luckily I came out of like the grunge era. So, you know, I was really into ripped up jeans and, you know, that kind of vibe. But when that all came in, I mean, you know, the biggest thing the biggest memory, if you ask me, like, how did I feel about my body? Like, if we just could just like tie it in a bow, is that, you know, I remember moments of, you know, getting ready with our friends to go out and things like that, and picking out which pair of low jeans to wear, and, you know, which pair of or like what top. I was trying to think of the
crop tops,
the crop top brands that was big at the time. I feel like it was Off the Wall. Am I right?
It was like that. What was it? It was some sort of brand. I don't know. We all had them in
Yeah, it was like everybody had them in every color. You know what I mean? And I remember really feeling like, and I was kind of, for anybody that doesn't know me, I'm kind of a short package. I'm a small package. Right. I'm a small package, but I've got the goods. You know what I mean? So I always kind of felt, and I grew up riding horses all the time. And I, you know, before I showed up in Canada, I went from being a beanstalk with no boobs, no hips, no nothing. And I went over a summer, and all of a sudden it was like, boom, 34 Ds and hips. Right. Like it just all happened to me over like a span of 3 months. It was like kind of like unbelievable. And so when I look back to those teenage years, I remember the feelings of insecurity, mostly getting ready with my friends. So like, you know, we're all getting ready to go out, and I just think like, oh my gosh, like, do I look like I have love handles in these low jeans? Like, I don't really like, and I'll be very honest, I didn't really like wearing that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it never really felt me, but I felt like this is what we do here in Vancouver, you know, because I had been just used to being a chameleon since I moved 100 million times in my life. So, you know, and I look back at that, and I think I might have said this to you before in a previous conversation. And, you know, this idea of not being able to enjoy yourself in the moment because you're worried about how you look is really sad to me, because I look back at photos of myself in like, you know, my teens and my early 20s. And I look at these, like, you know, our disposable camera pictures, and I think to myself, oh my God, you're so cute. And, you know, that night you were thinking about if you looked big in your mauve jeans, like, really? You know what I mean?
Well, and it's funny because I was always friends with you guys. And I mean, I've always been friends with short girls. I don't know why. And I'm not even that tall. I'm only 5'7". So like where my insecurities were coming in with all of that when we were getting ready and stuff is you guys all had boobs and I didn't really have boobs, but I had the like stick thin body mostly because I didn't eat anything. But I remember just feeling really insecure because I would watch you guys all in your tank tops and you all had cleavage and I didn't have that. And I remember just feeling kind of like a little bit awkward and like something was missing. And yeah, and just, I mean, the dialogue in my head was always that I was fat, but I was always on the leaner side and I just could never get skinny enough. And I feel like where that came from for me was like to counter what you were saying is I feel like I grew up here, right? And I feel like if you're a thinner person, maybe even like preteen child, this is something I've been educating a lot of my female clients on in the last few years is never comment on a teenage girl's weight or body ever. I mean, I actually think we should just extend that.
Can we just say all women?
All
just
women.
Like,
I was just
like leave that alone.
Let's just leave that alone. Like never. Don't comment on whether they lost weight. Don't comment on, you know, like you can make comments about appearance without making it about someone's body. And I have realized that especially our parents' generation, they really love to comment on bodies. It's something that's ingrained in them. And people would always comment on how thin I was all throughout my preteens into my early teen years. So by the time I got to 16 and I moved in with my dad, my mom would even comment on it. It was like she was very aware of weight, and my mom and I still have conversations about weight to this day. She tells me that she's overweight. She wants to lose it. We have this dialogue. It's probably a little bit unhealthy. I'm trying to change it, but it's just like moving in with my dad was a big thing. My stepmom started making me these lunches that I didn't normally eat. I started gaining weight because I wasn't eating obsessively like how I did when I lived with my mom. And that people stopped commenting on how thin I was. And when people stopped commenting on it, I noticed because people had done it my entire life, and then I stopped eating. So the reason I'm saying that is I have had several clients that they think that they're being positive when they know that their friend's child has had an eating disorder. They go over to their house for dinner, because it's so common in your teenage years, right? That you have a child in your life, you have somebody that starts to look a little too thin. This is a common thing, whoever it is. And what some of these women have done then is at dinner, they've turned to this child and said, "You look much better at this weight." What does that do for a teenager that has had an eating disorder? Their dialogue immediately goes to, "I look fat," and they're going to stop eating again.
Right.
From a personal experience. So I just wanted to throw that in because that was where my headspace was in my teenage years is very much like, and I didn't need any condiments. I only ate low fat everything. And it was a fear. It was a fear that was all consuming from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep. I was counting every single thing that went in my mouth.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
it's something that people don't realize, right? Like no one knows the dialogue we have going on in our head. It's
right.
wild,
Like if I would have had no idea. And we spent, there were times in our teenage years where we were together 24/7.
Yeah.
And I never would have known that was like a record player inside of your body. And you were doing that to yourself.
And I think the way I dealt with it was I would binge eat around you guys, right? So, and people thought that everything was fine because when I would go to a sleepover or hang out with friends, I would just binge eat a bunch of candy and shit. And then everybody would think like we're all doing the same thing. But then pretty much the whole next week, I wouldn't eat anything. You know what I mean? So it's just, this is not uncommon as being a personal trainer. And I think that's why I'm going over this, because I think for me, it's been something that I come back to in times of my life where I feel out of control. And I've realized this, like if we're having this conversation about us evolving our perspective, when I look at what I was doing then and how I've controlled my weight over the years, whenever I feel out of control in other areas of my life, I start obsessing about my weight, and I'm very, very cognizant of it now. And so when all of this happened, 2020, I started doing it again. And mainly it was because I was out of my routine. I wasn't able to work out the way I normally do. And it was so weird to go back to that headspace because it had been probably about 10 years since I had any of that dialogue. And it all started coming back. It was like all consuming again. And I knew it was irrational, right?
Yep.
And I was cognizant of it, but I couldn't stop it. And it's taken months now of me self-checking every single time those thoughts come in my head and just being like, okay, and doing things like, going for a walk, having those positive outlets that make you feel like, okay, I am feeling like this. What can I do to change what's happening inside my head and take control of it, but in a positive way,
Right. Absolutely. And I think that hits the nail on the head with some of the points you were making earlier in terms of these type of things are like, body image is something that rolls, and something that, it can be a snowball effect. You will carry things with you throughout your life, and it's a process of checking in and checking out with yourself, right? And it can be different from anyone, because the dialogue that you have with yourself can be different from your next door neighbor, in terms of sort of like being being thin, and not commenting on people's bodies, because you never know, in the Caribbean, this is being skinny can work against you a little bit in what's popular down here. You know what I mean? So like, I've had friends along the way where gaining weight is like where they want to be. They want to be, they want a bit more of a booty, they want a bit more of those things, and this is what they think will help you with the body image. But what really it is, it's about the way that you view yourself is not necessarily what needs to happen. You can compartmentalize those two. Of course there's overlapping, so I could say, you know what, I really feel like, with 2020, I was less active. As a photographer, I wasn't shooting as much, and I became less active and didn't really change my food choices. And then therefore my clothes aren't fitting me as good anymore. And I kind of have to go, oh my gosh, I haven't worn jeans in like 2 months, put the jeans on. They're not feeling the way that they used to feel. And that can, but that's different than me looking in the mirror and beating myself up. There's a there's a difference between the way that you look in the mirror and talk to yourself and sort of like, a weight loss journey or weight gain journey,
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's life, right? And I mean, I think that's why like acknowledging that some of this body image stuff does come from gaining and losing weight. Like, it's just like, I often think that that's a trigger sometimes for some of this negative dialogue, is if you've gone through a period where you have gained weight and you don't feel like your best self, you start going to this really negative, obsessive place. Like, this is what I observe with clients anyways.
Right. Yeah.
And I said this to somebody the other day, like, because she's on a weight loss journey. And I mean, I don't want to make this about weight loss, but I think it is a relevant point, is like, I just said to her, like, she's definitely on the right track. And I think, like as you were saying, like, you put your jeans on, you have your reference points, why it happened, you give yourself some, you just be kind to yourself, like, especially going through a year like what we've just gone through. Like, if you gain some weight, like, we've went through a lot in the last little while, and I think adding on negative self-talk to that isn't the best thing to do. But at the same time, if you're not happy with it, then, find your resources, figure out your game plan, set some goals, start that weight loss journey. But then once you do that, obviously, like, reassess it and reevaluate it when you're on it and make sure you're on the right track. But if you set your goals appropriately, and then, if you need to hire a professional to help you do that or whatever, or use an app like MyFitnessPal or something that's going to help you figure out like how many calories you need to eat to lose X amount of pounds a week, like, it's all math, right? Once you set those goals, let it go. Like, please don't come back to that headspace every single day of your life. And I think that would be the biggest thing, that I think when you're starting to have new habits surrounding body image, it's like any other thing. Like, if you're starting the habit of working out, you got to do it. Say you set the goal, it's 3 times a week. I'm going to go to the gym. You have that. You're going to go for 45 minutes, starting to talk nicer to yourself and having a different perspective on body image requires 2 things. It requires, what am I going to say instead of this? Because you can't just stop. So you have to check yourself. You have to, when you go to say, okay, my thighs are, not fitting into these jeans. I hate my thighs, blah, 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 blah. What is the dialogue you're going to say instead? Just say like, like, and maybe just if you are overweight and that's why you're obsessing about your size, say, I know I'm carrying 10 extra pounds. This is why I'm doing everything I can right now. And, I'm just I know I'm beautiful in lots of other ways, or whatever that dialogue is, you know?
Yeah. And whatever, and talking from, if I can just interject, because I feel like that's a great reference point. And for those of you that don't know me, and we can do further episodes on this, I am somebody that's had a lot of health issues over the last, since I was about 18 years old. And so that also definitely changed my dialogue over the years. Is, there were times in my life where a day that I could get up and go for a nice long walk was a really good day. And so sometimes the dialogue is literally like, I'm so happy I have these legs that are going to carry me. You know what I mean? And
Totally.
that sounds it can sound a little bit I don't know, melodramatic, but that's real. You know what I mean?
Super real. And I think, if there's anything we've learned this year, gratitude is a big thing to keep coming back to. Like, I'm grateful for having a house over my head. I'm grateful for having a job. And when you come to your self-worth and your body image, saying you're grateful to be able to walk. There's lots of people that can't, and if that's the only thing you can think of, if you can't actually go there with any other positive thing, you're just not, just go to that one, like even if you can't get to the point where you're able to tell yourself you're beautiful yet, just say, I'm grateful that I have legs that I can walk, and maybe take yourself for a 20-minute walk,
Right. And think about all these, this going off of that, it's like sometimes, it can be like, think of all the places this body has taken me. How many rooms have I gotten myself into? How many places have I traveled, and these have carried me through, the streets of Vancouver to the streets of Paris, through the Middle East and the Caribbean and all of these places. And I just think, I have a gift. Like the fact that I have been given this body with all the lumps and bumps and cellulite and whatever it is that I obsess about. This body has taken me to places that, I could have only dreamed of. And it's not, it's, a lot of people will separate that and say, well, you might separate that and say, oh, it's your drive, or if it's your brain getting you, or your business acumen, or whatever it is that have gotten you your places, but your body has been there with you too. And your body has brought you to those places too. And if you did not have, a functioning like body, those type of things would be a lot harder for you. And there's people in this world that, that I've connected with through being an educator and things like that, where some of these things are so much harder for other people. So it's like, some of my greatest accomplishments, I'm like, thanks legs for getting me there. You know what I mean? Thank you to my brain. Thank you to my brain for getting me there. You know what I mean? Sometimes, it's about those type of things at the very base. If you can't say anything good about yourself, sometimes you just got to go to the basics and go, where have my feet traveled? And your feet are connected to the rest of your body. And thank goodness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I agree with you. And I think like that's when you go back to kind of where we were going with trying to tackle this, I think, appreciating those moments along the journey, and just being like, okay, like, so I was here at this age, and then, this kind of happened, and then I got to here, and then, I dealt with some of that stuff, and then now I'm here. And, so my second point that I was going to make on that is just, I think where I've gotten to dealing with my own body image and self-worth is that when I get to a place where that negative dialogue is taking over more than the positive dialogue, whatever, I've been through a lot. It's funny. I'll just bring this in for a second. I had a friend reach out to me because they're going through imposter syndrome right now. And it's a real thing. And I definitely am somebody who continuously jumps into new projects, this being one of them. And, I'm pretty used to having that fear, kind of weird weird kind of uncomfortable feeling where you're like, ooh, I'm in a new place and I don't like it. And that is something that like will start to happen when you have this new dialogue that you're going to have with yourself. Like especially if you're someone that has held on to these negative thoughts, whatever it is, like, if you say you're stupid, and like one of my clients, she says to herself that she's a fat cow in the mirror. And I think she's over that now, but I would never know that that's dialogue that's happening in this woman's head. And it's shocking to me that the things we'll say and how long we'll say them to each other. And it becomes so much of a habit. So my point is that if that is your habit, you have to really start making a consistent effort to make it not your habit. And that requires regular check-ins. And so however
Yes.
you're doing it, whether it's like going back and being like, okay, like, but I'm here now from where I was at 16, and like, look at all the things that I've accomplished and look at where my legs have taken me, and like, give yourself some pats on the back and try to bring your self-worth up in other ways versus focusing on your body all the time. Because I just think as women, like, it's unfortunate that we get so much of our self-worth from how we feel about our bodies, not about our other accomplishments. Like it's always been an interesting reference point in terms of training women and men. Just like, I train these, like, by default of my job, people that can afford personal training are usually quite successful, right? And I train all these dynamic, like, amazing women, and it's just always so fascinating to me how it doesn't matter, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how far you've come in your career, how amazing and well balanced your children are, and how such a good mom you are, or whatever other cool shit you're doing in your life. If you don't have that self-worth and that ability to talk positively to yourself, it shows up in so many ways in terms of how you are showing up in life,
And to nerd out for a minute, that's historically what's happened is very much, women were treated as like through the, like, as a transaction, so like, in the wealthier classes and royalty, it was a transaction between two countries. I give you my daughter and our countries have peace, and she's going to bear children for you, and she's going to give you a male heir and all of those type of things. And it's very much about, those type of transactions is about two things. It's about what you look like, and it's about whether you can give someone kids. And both of those are very much connected to your body. And I think, if we now fast forward into how we were raised, anytime I went to see, and I love my grandparents, but anytime I didn't see them for a long time and we would go to visit them, they, the first things is that you girls are so pretty. You girls are so beautiful. Jenna, look at your hair. The hair for me is a big one.
Yeah.
And, and so it was more about sort of like the physical aspect of what I was like bringing to the table, rather than like, my grades or what I was accomplishing in my horseback riding or whatever it was that I was into growing up. And that is just such a common way to talk to little girls, is to immediately comment on the Easter dress they're wearing for Easter dinner, and those type of things. And that is ingrained in you, you know what I mean? And so when you're looking at, you're telling me about these amazing women with accomplishments, and same as me, I run into women and I just think, like, as a photographer, either their work is absolutely amazing, or when I was an educator working with fellow women educators and just looking at them and thinking, you are so brilliant. But then when we got to the staff room, we would like talk about, oh my God, there's donuts in the staff room. Like, and I had 3 today, you know what I mean? And it's like, what? I just taught this amazing lesson on like whatever it was, you know what I mean? And, so, and then going into that further is the whole child aspect of it. And I see this a lot now in our, in our 30s, and, I don't have kids. And I think we might tackle that in a next podcast, but the way that your body is tied to bringing life into the world as well is huge. And I'm sure that you see that all the time, like, get your body back after you have a baby. You have a body. You don't need to get it back.
I know.
You have a body, and it did the most amazing freaking thing that I can barely understand that it did. And you don't need to get it back. You just need to,
think that,
this is different, I bet you. And that's where.
That's the thing. It's like, I think as women, there's just, if we can sum it up in one statement, I think it's just that no matter what we do, we're never enough. You know what I mean? And I just think that is literally, it seems to be just what we're continuing to bring forward into our, like, that's what we need to change about the future generation, I guess. If we're raising
Right.
the next generation of little girls, how do we talk to them in a different way that like we can change it? I think we can change it, and it has changed, but the changes are small. It's small,
Right.
and there's still this, like, if you're carrying a baby, you should be working out 5 days a week on top of carrying the baby, even though you feel like shit and you've got heartburn and, you know,
You're working a full-time job.
yeah, and it actually hurts you sometimes. Like a dialogue
Right.
I have with a lot of women. I just had a friend who had a baby last week, and I said to her, I was like, this is your second baby. You carry big babies. We know this. And I just said, you know, it might, because everything is a little different the second time, right? And I literally looked her in the eye and I was like, if you can't work out this whole time, I want you to be kind to yourself, and I want you to just tell yourself that that's okay.
Right.
And it was interesting because, like, my opinion has a lot of weight for people, because if I'm the personal trainer in their life that is able to tell them that, and she was able to let it go, and she actually did get to 6 months and she wasn't able to work out, and she just embraced it. And I was so proud of her, because it was so great to just watch her enjoy her pregnancy and just enjoy, she had a craving for ice cream, she ate it. You know, she went for a walk when she felt like she had the energy, and she was just in this really positive, I'm bringing life into the world mindset that I hadn't seen for a while from a pregnant woman. I had just seen so much negative dialogue surrounding that they weren't doing enough throughout their pregnancy, and they weren't. I mean, it's amazing. I'll hear women say they feel gross, and I get it. Like, I've never been pregnant. I get it. You must feel gross when you're pregnant, like that at times.
Well, your whole, it's like, it's not even also about, I'm sure, and maybe we need to have a pregnant lady on this podcast. I think that would be amazing. So
Totally.
pregnant ladies apply, because we want to talk to you, because it's not necessarily about.
All right, my dog's gonna pee on the floor. I'm just
That's okay. Life happens. It's not necessarily about, I love that, comedic relief. It's not necessarily about the physical aspect of what a woman looks like when they're pregnant. It's like what you're feeling. I can't imagine what it feels like to have something living inside of you, shifting and changing everything that's inside of your body. And then on top of that, the hormonal stuff, the boob stuff, all the stuff.
Yeah,
so
the
it's like
stuff, the lack of partner stuff, whatever it is, right?
Whatever's going on in your life, managing
the fear that maybe everything will be different when it's done, and not knowing what that unknown is going to be, because everything's going to be different, but you don't know which aspects of it are going to be the worst,
100%. So yes, pregnant people, please apply. We want to talk to you about how you're feeling about your body, and we want to talk about it all. But, I just feel like, that statement of you are enough can be a very liberating statement once you're able to put it into practice. If you're able to do your affirmation and say, you know what, I'm enough today. I have all these things going for me. I'm enough today. And then therefore your friend being pregnant, or your client, being pregnant, and then deciding to enjoy yourself. Sometimes it is a choice that you have to choose every day, and you have to go, today, I'm enough, and this is how I'm going to feel today. And those type of mindful moments are really important, I think, in terms of women's journey with their own body,
I think so. I mean, if I can look back to like how I've gotten to bring this self-awareness to the dialogue I have with myself, I would say it's been through doing exercises like that. Like, I don't know if I was cognizant of it the entire time, but I feel like being a personal trainer just gave me a really interesting crash course on human nature, human emotions, like human perspective. Like, I get so much out of my job in terms of getting inside people's heads, that I think where it started to shift for me was training all these women in their 50s and 60s as a woman in their 20s. And I think I just decided at some point that I was like, I don't want to carry this with me until I'm that age. Like, I don't want to be in this headspace my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that's where I was going with what I said in the beginning, where it was just like, that doesn't mean that throughout our lives, we're not going to have these moments where you get to a negative place. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's fucking life, you know, and like,
Yeah.
you know, your husband cheats on you, or, you know, you lose your job, or like, you know, you're forced into a transition that you're not ready for. Like all of those things are sometimes triggers in your life. And I think that was what was going on for me this year was, you know, like I was fucking forced into a whole new world. Like a lot of people were, but like
Yep.
I had a lot of changes all at once. And even though it's always interesting to resonate also with the fact that like this can come up whether or not they're positive or negative changes. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's also something that I've had to deal with over the years is like, I read this psychology book years ago, and it was all these short stories that a psychologist had written about his practice over the years. Like he used examples and he put them into chapters that it was like change, loss, grief,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like, and one of the change short stories was about achieving a positive thing. And
Mm-hmm.
he said that a common theme when you achieve a positive thing is that it's almost like a postpartum thing after, because you
Wow.
had some, and it is something that I've come back to so many times in my life because I am a goal setter and I've
Mm-hmm.
been lucky enough to achieve some big ones in my life. And it's something that you're never prepared for after. It's like you've worked for so hard, so long on something longer than anybody would ever know, you know, like
Yeah,
you
you're speaking to me right now. Like I'm just you. Yes,
like
this is
we
so true.
we were,
Yeah.
and I think like we even acknowledged that before we started recording this podcast, guys, where we were saying like we've literally been planning this podcast for what, 6 months now, over 6 months.
I think it's been over because we
Yeah,
were in the pandemic in full force like
it was
last spring
probably
talking about this.
April or May, last May, and we're in January now. And I, I think I've just gotten better at just knowing that there's a journey to this stuff,
Yeah.
and knowing that okay, it's out there, and I mean we've even had little check-in points along the way of just being like, are we still doing this, like, you know, and does this feel right? And like sometimes the timing isn't right. And I think
Right.
where I'm going with this with self-worth is like when you're in transition or you've had a positive change, I think, you know, just acknowledging that it might be a bit weird to not know what's next. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you've had an achievement, you're going to be like, well, fuck, like now what? You know, like if
Yeah.
you get an award, if you know, I opened a personal training studio, and literally I just sat there for years and I was like, now what? And
Yeah.
and so that where that went with my dialogue and my self-worth was I'm just going to be a personal trainer my whole life. Like this is all that I'm good at. There's nothing else I'm good at. And I've backed myself into a corner. I've created my own prison. Like I had so many of those dialogue things that were coming up. They weren't all to do with body image, but because my self-worth started to go downhill in a lot of other ways, my body image started to come into play with that too. And I think that sometimes is something to check in with too, where you're like, okay, why am I in this really weird headspace? And how can I
Mm-hmm.
get myself out of it? And sometimes it's just about accepting and just being like, okay, it's okay that I don't know where I'm going. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay that I'm not where I want to be. And the fact that like it's also important to just know that like every single fucking person goes through this. Every person will go through imposter syndrome. Every person will go through achieving a goal and wondering what's next. Every
Right.
person will go from having a goal, not doing it, and feeling failure. Like it's just that
Yep.
those are themes in life that we're all going to go
Mm-hmm.
through. So how do we
Mm-hmm.
deal with them?
Right, right, absolutely. And I think it is so with body image because, you know, like because body image gets convoluted so much in terms of what you look like, what, you know, it can be, you know, this is like the thing with the body is like, oh, you know, 2021's here. Hopefully it's going to be a better year. Who knows? Because we're not that far in and things are hitting the fan still. But it's like, okay, I didn't start the year the way that I wanted to. And then you think of yourself as a failure for that. You know what I mean? And so in terms of body image, it's a little like, women have gone through all of that with their bodies where they've set goals from themselves, either achieved it and not known what to do next, or realized it wasn't enough, which then you go, okay, I guess fitting into my jeans isn't enough, and now I need to explore why that is, and maybe it's connected to my self-worth and things like that, which I firmly believe that body image equals self-worth, right? I feel like those two just like fit together like a glove, because you can go through so many goals that you set or so many goals that you fail at, like for me, and I think that I've told you this before, in terms of my body image, the way that I was, when I was 16, and how I've kind of grown now, for me, it's very much about my choices. And that's where I feel like I will beat myself up about, where it's more about my food choices, than aesthetically what I, look like, you know what I mean? Where now I kind of am at a place where like, I really did not need to eat half a bag of Cheeto Puffs. Okay, I'm lying. I didn't. No, I'm lying. I need to come clean.
Maybe you needed to eat them that day. Maybe you need to, because some days I need to eat a half a bag of cheesies. That's actually what I need. And like, I've had so many guys date me over the years, and they are shocked that I have chips in my house. But I've gotten to, it's actually for me with body image, it's really fucked up, because I actually will go to the place where if I don't have chips in my house, I go too much neurotic with the health thing.
Right.
So I actually had a therapist tell me, what if you just have chips in the house and you practice eating, look on the back, you're going to know how many calories it is. And what if you just ate that many chips, and then you knew how many calories it was, and then you were like, okay, like I enjoyed those chips, and you carry on with your day. And it's actually something that I do. So like, I have boyfriends. It's actually bad for boyfriends or guys that I have over my house, because they'll end up eating the whole bag because they didn't go through the therapy thing. So most people that I start dating end up gaining weight because there's always chips in the house. But for me, some days, it's actually a weird thing I do, where if I'm going too weirdly into a negative body image, I actually go and get the chips and I eat half a bag of cheesies. And I'm like, I'm still okay. I'm still okay. I actually psychologically will feel better from just doing it. And I mean, we all have our things, but I also think having guilt, if you need to just go and eat a piece of chocolate cake because you had a fucking shitty week, please don't carry the guilt from that into your entire next week. Just accept the fact that you ate the chocolate cake, even if you're trying to lose weight, and then get back to eating your veggies and chicken the next day,
Right. Yeah. And that's what I try to tell myself, but that's where I beat myself up on. It's not necessarily how it's manifesting itself, in terms of weight. It's like, man, I know better than to eat the bag of cheesies. Like I shouldn't have done that, but it was awesome. And tomorrow's another day, and I just have to keep moving. You know what I mean? And that's one thing that has, I think, helped me when I'm going through any sort of hard time, is that I am somebody that flourishes when they feel like they are moving through their life. Any time in my life where I felt stagnant is generally a dark place for me. And it's probably because I was raised on airplanes. I was raised to move and like change.
You're going through that a lot right now. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that like the thing that helps me out of it is to go, yep, you ate the bag of cheesies, but guess what? Tomorrow's another day, and you can move through your day the way that you choose to tomorrow. And sometimes I make it and sometimes I don't, because I do have a little streak in me for junk food. Which we connected on as teenagers, I feel like, with the Pizza Huts and I can't remember or was it Panago? I can't remember.
It was Pizza Hut cheese pizza. Yeah.
Yeah. On the trampoline with all dressed Ruffles chips and either like Pepsi or Coke. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, whoa. But Yeah. So I feel like, it can manifest itself in different ways, right? Where it's like for some people, it might be like their outward physical manifestation. But for me, it's very much about the choices that I make for myself and not using food. I think this is more me as well, not using food to not satiate me physically, but to satiate me emotionally. And I feel like that's also sort of like a piece to this body image thing where people use food to satiate feeling down. Or it can be feeling down, or it could be feeling bored,
Mm-hmm.
where like I feel a little down or I feel a little bored. And then I like go and, go for the cheesies. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or the shortbread cookies, which you saw me
I know.
do.
I loved that the other day. She's just
Like, this is
mowing
what it is
down on like
today.
5 shortbread cookies, like just
Yeah,
crazy.
just like going for it, you know what I mean? So I feel like, or if I'm in like a deep thinking mode, if I'm thinking for whatever reason, if I'm like really reflecting on my life, food is very much a part of that for me, which is kind of interesting. Like I've noticed that when I'm in like very reflective stages, I go to food and I go to coffee
Mm-hmm.
and I go to things like that when I feel like I'm cocooning and reflecting about what it is my next move is going to be or whatever it's going to be. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know, like I think that what we're trying to get to here is just sort of like this is a never-ending process that you need to accept that this
Yes.
is the way that it's going to be because you will have your body for your whole life, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
And it's the check-ins that matter.
Yeah, and I think that's also, I think, just getting to know yourself, right? I think like a large part of this chat has just been that, I mean, I feel very lucky that, I at 36, I feel like I know myself pretty well right now. And that's
Right.
come
That's
from,
what I was going to ask you is I
yeah,
was going to say, okay, because we talked about our 16-year-old selves, but we didn't, and we've talked about kind of how we feel now. And we talked about sort of a little bit about the process, but like, what do you feel like for you has been the most impactful way? Is it the getting to know yourself piece of this and identifying your patterns, or what do you
I
think it is?
I think, I mean, having my job is really hard sometimes because it's all about my body. And so it's in a way it's good because it keeps me accountable in terms of like staying on track and not eating the whole bag of cheesies, eating a half a bag of cheesies, like it's like I'm always kind of doing that little self-assessment.
Mm-hmm.
But it is something that I've had to come to terms with in terms of like I can't really get out of that mindset of being aware of my body and how much weight I'm carrying because of my job. So I think
Right.
coming to terms with that and knowing that that's just a thing that's going to be part of my life as long as I do this career has been helpful. And just knowing that like it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's just an important part to know, and to know that because I know that people are looking at my body, it's just part of my job, and are feeling like, as weird as it sounds, inspired by how I look, and it's inspiring them to work out. That like this is just what people have told me, and especially from having Instagram and all this stuff, it's like in a way I'm like, okay, just coming to peace with it and just being like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like I like, and I mean, I'm lucky I've found my system of eating. I know what I've got to do to maintain that. So I feel quite comfortable now because I have troubleshooted my diet so many times. And like, if you guys are on that journey where you haven't quite figured it out for yourself, like just continuing to try new things. And, if something isn't working, like try something new. Like it's just, it's all about just getting to know yourself, and you just start to
Mm-hmm.
develop your system of just being like, okay, when I do these things, I feel good about myself. And I think for me,
Right.
the biggest thing is like, I know when I'm off track. Like I know when I'm drinking too much. I know when I'm eating too much salt. I know, and I've been lucky enough to have enough moments throughout my career that I've done that and then brought myself back. I've done that, brought myself back. I think just having your little toolbox of things that you do, and you're like, okay, well, this is what works. So like
Mm-hmm.
whether or not I'm ready or not to bring myself back to that healthy place where I start to feel good about myself, and it's okay if you're not. Like in the summer, I was like, fuck it, whatever. I don't feel great about myself, but I'm just enjoying the sunshine. I'm going to sit on this patio. I'm going to drink one more bottle of wine because I knew that this winter was going to happen in Vancouver and we weren't going to have these opportunities to be outside. And I just kind of went with it, but it went on a little bit longer. I did end up gaining 8 pounds, and like, not that it's all about the weight, but I knew while it was happening that I wasn't going to feel great about myself at the end. But I knew that I was going to be okay and I was going to bring it back.
And you knew that, like, yourself enough that like you will come back into yourself. You will well, I don't want to say bounce back, but you will find what works for you. You will get out of that mode, and you will. It's the same with me. Is like, it's okay not to be okay. It's actually okay to wake up and to go through that negative self-talk. And that's actually a piece that I feel like we should add here, is that I don't think that either of us are saying like, don't negative talk. I think it's acknowledge you're going to do that. Acknowledge we all go through periods where like our self-talk isn't great, isn't positive, right? And that we've got to just know that we will come out the other side. As terrible as it is now, you have the faith that, you will come out of it, right? So yeah.
And I mean, I think that is a big thing. Like I also really appreciate, like, as a closing point, like when we were starting to talk about body image, I always enjoy, I feel like you kind of keep me in check in terms of just, you have really come a long way in terms of just being like, yeah, I'm 15 pounds overweight. And, I just think like you've come to a really positive place with it. And I admire that in you, because I do think that not everybody is able to just be like, you own it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And you don't go immediately to a negative place with it. You just are like, you know what, this is who I am right now. This is why. And I'm me, I'm still showing up. I'm still great. And it's not about my weight. It's just, it's a piece of the puzzle. It's something that's happening, but it's not affecting your self-worth, I guess. And I always respect that about you.
Right. And I think that comes from, and, I'll throw to you too for a second, is when you're I was an educator as well. And, when I have had periods of negative self-talk, or, I look back at what what I would tell my younger self and things like that, the stuff that I would say to myself in the mirror, oh my God, I would never say that to anybody. So what is the point in doing it to myself? Like, really, like, if, you're your own, that saying of like, you're your own worst enemy, but in those circumstances, it could be true. And so I think oh my gosh, I just lost my headphone. Hold on. We've got puppies running around and we've got loose headphones.
Life.
But I think what I was trying to say is that, having a come to Jesus moment with myself and saying like, why would you say stuff to yourself that you would never say to somebody else? Like, what is in there? Like, and that's a very confronting and quite a dark place to go to. And it's really scary when you confront yourself like that and you go, what is it in me right now that is I am doing this to myself? And realizing that the rest of the world, and this is going to sound really harsh, but the rest of the world doesn't feel what you feel. No. Right. So just as you were sitting there on the trampoline while we were eating too much Pizza Hut when we were 16, I had no idea the way that you were speaking to yourself. You know what I mean?
Totally. And I think that's the common theme. And that's where I think I was going with bringing up my example of like the life transitions, because I think it is, these type of dialogues are often triggered by an external influence, basically, in my experience. Like, it does, either that, or you just literally haven't gotten to a place where you've ever been able to let go of it, but if you are on this journey and you've had those moments where you feel pretty good about yourself, and then you, for whatever reason, are in this place where you're back there, I think, sometimes just acknowledging whatever those life transitions that have happened surrounding that experience, and coming to terms with that and being like, this is okay. I've just been through some stuff, and, and I'm not my best self right now. And, and for whatever reason, or just like, I'm feeling a little bit lost right now, or, like I've had a lot of women that like when their kids move out, you know, they have this huge identity shift, you know, where they're just like, I don't know who I am anymore, you know? And I think it's just, I mean, that's where my brain goes with, I mean, it's so interesting because I do have conversations all day. And I just find transitions fascinating because I just think transitions bring up all sorts of stuff. And I think, you know, if you have been through a transition, or you're, you know, it is important to just kind of be like, okay, this is part of it. This is part of why I'm here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just, you know, and okay, well, where is my identity piece in all of this? And why am I feeling like I don't belong right now? And what's triggered me, I guess, is the question. And I just think, I mean, we're all just living in our own experience. And I think that's when we started this podcast, that is literally why we're doing this, you guys, is like, we're just trying to bring up topics that are connecting points that we're all hopeful. Like maybe you're lucky and you've never dealt with any of the things we're going to talk about on this podcast, but I would say most women, men too, are going through this stuff. Like we're all on the same journey, and some of us aren't lucky enough. Like I'm lucky I have Jenna. I can talk to her about this stuff. But if you guys are out there and you don't have a friend that you can have these really raw dialogues with, that's literally why we're doing this podcast, is just to have
absolutely
tough conversations, you know?
Absolutely. And also to hear from others, you know, like I feel like part of this journey for us is to kind of open ourselves up to the world as well. You know, we want to hear what you think. Like, what are the pieces here? You know, is there anything in this conversation that I don't want to say resonated with you, but you think that maybe you want to expand on? I actually think that that's really important also, is that, you know, we want to hear the voices of others as well. Because I feel like both of us have always been really committed to being like lifelong learners. Life is so intriguing to me, and I love all the pieces of it. I love all the beautiful parts, and I actually love all the ugly parts. You know, I have an affinity for the darkness. So, I mean, I would love, you know, to hear from anybody who's out there that's listening, where even if you want to expand on anything that we've said, or if you disagree with something we've said, I want to hear from you, because I feel like new perspectives make the world go round. And, you know, I look forward to continuing this, because I feel like something in me is telling me that this podcast is, that's what this podcast is going to be about, is connecting with others and, you know, providing a give and take relationship through creating a community. So is that, you know, our body image episode?
That's a wrap. Yeah. Okay. And I would say that's a wrap on body image, but not, because as Jenna said, like literally this is going to be, I don't know if this is going to be the first one. We haven't really decided what we're posting first, guys, but this is going to be one of the first podcasts we post, and we are so grateful that you are listening, and we would love to get to know you. And please do comment, because we're just learning. We're trying to figure it all out, and we would love to hear your opinions. So,
all right. And yeah, we'll close with 3 words: to be continued.
And you are enough.
You are enough. 3 words: to be continued, and you are enough. I love it.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.